Andy Worski Jr. Groiper, good afternoon. Who else? I don't even know any of you people. Who even shows up to this stream? I don't even know one of you. So, the first thing I want to do on the stream, so I just saw this before I went live. This is actually partially why I wanted to go live. I saw this clip on Twitter. Apparently, Destiny, he's live right now. Excuse me. And he just did a stream where he took a map quiz. He took a geography quiz. And this was the result. He took a U.S. map quiz. Okay, that's a quiz of all the American states. And I'll just play the clip. This is what he had to say.
Iowa. Okay, I'll take it. All right, okay. Not too bad. Not too bad.
Okay, look at this. This guy has been a political live streamer for 10 years. For over 10 years. He is on YouTube. He's like the #1 guy on the left. For 10 years. He is going to invite his audience to say, listen to me. I have something to say about politics. I have expertise, and you need to listen to my opinions. This is his... He got 64%. You can't see him. That's my buddy. He got 64%. It took him 5 minutes. Took him 4 minutes, 20 seconds to get 64%. He didn't know where Montana or Wyoming were. Wisconsin, Kentucky, Indiana, Alabama, Mississippi, Virginia, Maryland, Delaware, New Jersey, Connecticut, Massachusetts, and New Hampshire. He didn't know where any of these places were.
Virginia. We lived here for 2 years. It's one of these up here. I don't remember what any of these were. It was like Connecticut, New York. Fuck. Okay. All right. Connecticut. No. Fuck. No. Okay, Wisconsin. Where are we at here? I'm pretty sure it borders Nebraska, right? Nebraska, Iowa. What's down here? Is this Wisconsin? Or is Wisconsin like over here? And I was like Kentucky. Fuck. Missouri, obviously. This is Kansas. It's got to be like one of these guys. Tennessee, Kentucky. Oh my God. Wisconsin's on the Great Lakes?
It's like every time I talk to this guy, it's like this guy doesn't know anything. He doesn't know anything. And, you know, you might be saying to yourself, well, so what? Who can get 100% on an Africa map quiz or Asia or Europe? Or your own freaking country. But it's not like we pulled this guy off the street and said, hey, take a bunch of map quizzes and tell us your opinion about the Middle East. He's a political live streamer for 10 years. So I wanted to take the quiz to see what I get. Now I want to take the quiz. And by the way, it took him 4 minutes. It took him 4 minutes, 20 seconds to get everything wrong. And by the way, this is basic. This is basic. Everyone should know. Every American should be able to do this. Every American, and not even just every American, but certainly if you talk about American politics for a living and to spend your entire adult life talking about it, you should be able to do that. You should be able to click on every American state without failing. Let's watch the debate that he did on
People
Israel.
choose the stopping point of history in a very peculiar way, saying that Arab-Palestinian hostility has been fostered by the Israeli state since the ethnic cleansing of 48 ignores what precipitated the ethnic cleansing of 48, which was the Brits leaving and all the Arab countries saying, well, we're going to try to eliminate all the Jewish people here because f this, right?
It's not of great interest to me.
Wait. How is that not a great interest? That's a really important war. That's where Israel expanded their territory in 3 directions. In the 21st...
It doesn't bother you.
If you cut me off like that...
I know I'm right.
No, then let me finish this point without cutting me off immediately.
There have been polls suggesting that Arabs who are anti...
There's been at least 4 Arab-Israeli wars where 10+ Arab countries have explicitly stated that their goal is to destroy the nation of Israel. That's probably why they're a little bit dicey about Arabs gaining a significant voting hold in their country. That's probably why.
My God, you are really into this Israel narrative. I mean, I'm surprised.
Hold on, I'm sorry. Did I just say something that's factually incorrect?
Yeah, you didn't. But the United States was attacked on 9/11. There wasn't a movement there wasn't big support to take away voting rights.
Because the United States is the strongest country militarily that has ever existed in the history of all of the world, and we're surrounded by the 2 largest oceans on the planet, defending us from all foreign attacks. Do you think that our position is the same as Israel?
Israel, I think before 7th October, it was fairly comparable because Israel, if you look at the amount of casualties they had since the Yom Kippur War, you're really emotional about this. I'm a little surprised.
Wait. There you are. What's up? Do you wanna? What is your? Do you wanna introduce yourself?
Sure. Yeah. So I'll just introduce myself. My name is Matt Cockerell. I'm a PhD student at the London School of Economics in history. I have a modest internet profile called History Speaks.
Oh,
and
I know this guy.
Yeah, that's essentially it. I'm very engaged in the
Well, I know of him. He doesn't
in
like
the crisis
Gotcha.
right now,
Okay.
and have sympathy for the Palestinian side certainly more than the Israeli side.
Gotcha.
But I'm not pro Hamas like a lot of people
Gotcha.
online are for some reason. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, hit me up with because I'm cramming hard because I've got like limited time before a Ben Shapiro debate. That's probably not going to involve this at all. So give me your like few minute like
What are you going to
Steelman.
debate with? What are you going to debate with Shapiro about?
Hopefully stuff related to Biden's presidency and what a Trump presidency might look like, basically.
Okay, so you're not going to debate on the Israel because I'd assumed you were on the. So here is the argument I would make. The argument I would make is not
Shapiro
that Hamas are
destiny
good
debate?
guys or they're not terrorists. They were justified in massacring people. This is a lot of far left argument. The argument I
This
would
is
make
really good.
is that the hatred that led young men to produce Hamas, to join Hamas, so like the causality, right? Would not have happened but for decades of Israeli policy aimed at ethnic cleansing. That's the one ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. That's the first point.
Sure.
And the second point, going back to the founding of the country and the founding ideology of the country, really. And the second point I'd make is that Israel, and I think this is a relevant point for you because you come at this from a liberal perspective, which actually I share. Unlike a lot of people on my side are like base North Korea, base Stalin, but I come from a liberal perspective, and I think a lot of liberals are siding with Israel and don't realize Israel's a deeply illiberal society. And just to make a couple points in this regard, in 2014, 2015, Pew surveyed the Israeli population and found that nearly half of all Israelis support a mass ethnic cleansing of the Arab population. This question was asked in general terms: do you support removal of the Arabs? Nearly half said yes, like 46, 48%. That's one expression of this. Another expression of this is the vast majority, according to the same polls, said that Jews should receive special treatment under the law. Another expression of this is nearly 90% of Israelis, 80, 90%, according again to Pew, said they'd never let their child, or they'd be deeply uncomfortable with their child marrying a Christian or a Jew. So I think that Israel has promoted a narrative in the West that it is a liberal society, it's in compliance with international Western norms, and this is a fairy tale that has been sold through propaganda. And I think that the hatred that people in Gaza feel is completely comprehensible. What we can't justify is cashing it out in massacring people, right? We have to condemn that, and they did it. Like, it's not the argument that this was all crossfire. They haven't produced evidence, so we have to. If we're being rational, we have to assume they massacred innocent people, right? And we have to condemn that. But what is the hatred? What is the source of the hatred? That's what I'm interested in. And here's another point I'd make. So the common argument given is, oh, these are just savages. They're Muslims. They hate Jews. Blah blah blah. That's a very common meme on the pro-Israel side.
Okay.
Well, you have in Jordan a majority population that is Palestinian. The majority of Jordanians are Palestinian. You have a small Christian minority there. We have like a science experiment. If we're looking at Islam, Jews and Christians have the same standing in Islam. They're Ahad al-Kitab, people of the book, but they're lower than Muslim. Where are the massacres of Christian Jordanians by Palestinians? Zero. Where is even the social discrimination? It's virtually, unless you're talking about people who converted from Islam to Christianity, Christians are treated very well in Jordan. And this isn't me saying that. You can look up their socioeconomic standing. They're not subject to violence. You can look up polls of how Muslims view them. They're treated well by the Palestinians there. So what is the difference between the radical attitudes of Gazans versus the tolerant attitudes of Jordanian Palestinians to their Christian minority? It's clearly this brutal policy of occupation, which and also.
Well, wait, can you? Here, let's go point by point, actually, because obviously I'm going to challenge you on all these points.
Sure.
On that last thing you said. So you're saying Christians are treated well, and we'll say countries like Jordan. Why do you think Jewish people?
In Jordan.
Huh?
In Jordan.
Yeah. Why do you think Jewish people were treated so poorly in every Arab country after 48?
They certainly were treated very poorly. There was ethnic cleansing. There was harassment. It's unjustified, and it's to be condemned.
Well, but what was the Arab justification for it?
The reason for it was the conflict.
Yes,
primarily.
But the conflict was in.
It was a sense of collective guilt.
Yep.
For the conflict.
Exactly.
No, look.
Well, yeah, wait. I just want to be really, really, really clear, okay? Because you made the claim that in Islam, Jews and Christians have the same standing, and then in Jordan, you're saying, well, look, Christians and all these people were massacred, okay? The implication being that Jewish people somehow did something to be massacred in all these Arab countries, but Jewish people didn't. Israelis did in the Middle East, in Israel. So I'm asking you, what is the Arab justification for the pogroms, for the...
Okay, so right away, I apologize, I'm eating. I know I kind of like a slob right now. Let me finish this bite, and I'll come back to it, okay?
Seizure of property for the expelling of Jewish people in Arab states post 48, because it wasn't Israelis they were expelling, it was Jewish people, right?
Justification. So I don't. Again, I'm a liberal Western. I do have connection to the Arab world through my maternal side, who's Egyptian, but so I do have some bias there. But I am a liberal Westerner who doesn't.
So notice how right out of the gate, there's this interesting little sleight of hand, which you might have missed. But History Speaks is making a claim about the Palestinian Gazans and their motivation for hating Israel. He says that the meme on the Zionist side is that the reason that the Palestinians have animosity towards Israel is because they are savages. They are savages, they are barbarians, they are Muslims. And that's true, that argument. It's true that argument is used by the Zionists all the time. They say these are terrorists, it's a barbaric place, and the reason that the Gazans have this antipathy towards Israel is because they're Muslims. And that's why they hate America as well. That's why they hate Europe. They are Muslims, they hate infidels, they hate everyone that isn't Muslim because they are savages. That is the argument. And what this Egyptian guy, the History Speaks, is saying is that, well, that is easily disprovable because in Jordan, Christians are treated equally. That Islam regards Jews and Christians similarly, and in Jordan, Christians are not treated badly. So it follows that, that their religion or their primitiveness is not the reason for their antipathy towards Jews, because if they hated Jews, for being unbelievers, then why would they not hate Christians too? Why would they not hate Christians as much? Why would they not treat Christians like they treat the Israelis? He said, and the obvious reason, and Destiny laid this out, is because of Jewish behavior. They are attacking Jews, and History Speaks says, well, that's a form of collective retaliation, that in the Arab countries and in countries where Israel did not expel Palestinians like Egypt or Iraq, he said Jews were punished, but they are being punished as a collective response to what Israel's doing. It doesn't make it right, but the Jews are being targeted in these other places for that reason. But there's an interesting sleight of hand where Destiny says, okay, well, what about, Jews are being treated worse in Jordan than the Christians are, but what about the Jews in Egypt? What about the Jews in Iraq? No, Israel didn't do stuff to those countries, he says, and they're not punishing Israel, they're just punishing Jews. And it's like, okay, but you've totally missed the point of the argument. History Speaks even says, well, Jews were expelled in those other places, and that was wrong. But nevertheless, they were expelled as a response to what Israel did. And Jews being Jewish and Israel being a Jewish state, it was a form of collective reprisal. Egypt punished the Jews in Egypt because of what the Jewish state Israel did to the Arabs in Palestine. Now, History Speaks said that's wrong, and we can say that that's wrong. But it has nothing to do with the argument. The argument is that if Arabs and Muslims were just violent, if they were just a problem for no reason, and they hate Jews purely because their religion compels them to, or their backwardness makes them xenophobic, then Jordanians would hate Christians. But that's not the case. That Egypt collectively punished the Jews for the behavior of the Jewish state really has nothing to do with that. Because even, if anything, it proves the opposite. It says that all the so-called anti-Semitism in the region, because Jews lived in the Middle East. The pogroms towards Jews in the Middle East were a response to what Israel did. And that's really the point. Because what the Zionists say is that, or Jews generally, they say that any anti-Semitism or anti-Zionism is because people just hate Jews. If you have negative attitudes towards Jews, if you're critical of Jews or the state of Israel, that's because you just hate Jews. For an irrational reason, it's pure xenophobia, it's pure bigotry. It's never a response to Jewish behavior. You're never anti-Semitic because Jews are behaving badly. You're never anti-Israel because the Israeli state did something wrong. It always has to be irrational. And what this guy is saying is, well, let's test it. In Palestine, the Palestinians hate the Israelis, but right across the river, it's the same people. The Jordanians don't hate Christians. So it would follow that they are capable of living among people that don't share their religion and people that are different from them. And therefore, the Palestinians hate the Israelis because of how the Israelis treat them. And Destiny's rebuttal is to say, okay, but what about the Arab countries that expelled Jews where the Israeli state didn't act in those places? But the argument's wrong because even if it's misguided, even if the Egyptians or the Iraqis or whoever, even if they expelled Jews who had nothing to do with Israel, it's misguided, but it's still a response to what Israel did. It's a form of collective punishment. It's misguided, but it's still a response. What catalyzed that was the Nakba. So it disproves its own argument right out of the gate. That's
unbelievable massacre, expropriating property, and so on. If you want me to tell you why these people thought it was justified, it was because, which is not my position, it's because of the 1948 and 1950 ethnic cleansing project by Israel of the majority of the Palestinian population. So in the 1948 war, this is according to Benny Morris, who's a Zionist and very pro-Israel, although he's a serious historian. I recommend him to you the other day in point of fact.
Sure, Benny Morris, I believe, is part of the four new
right. Papa
Israeli
is
historians.
A little bit, even for me, who's very pro-Palestinian, Papa's a little bit tendentious, let's say. Sure. Morris is good.
That's fine. But, yeah, we've got a lot of Benny Morris stuff we read. Yeah, okay,
anyway,
go ahead.
Morris is my top guy here. Morris, his analysis was, there's this national myth, I'm sure you'll hear this on Israel Twitter, that the Arabs just left voluntarily because their armies were about to attack and so on. Benny Morris found that the vast majority of the people who left in 1948 were either war refugees or they were just physically removed, like ethnically cleansed by the Israelis. So the vast majority of these 800,000 or so people were either war refugees or were physically removed, were ethnically cleansed. And then in 1950, Israel passed a law expropriating their property with no compensation. These are war refugees and ethnic cleansing victims. So in my view, they're all ethnic cleansing victims at that point. If Russia were to say we're taking all of the property and and you're not allowed to return to Ukrainian war refugees, that's ethnic cleansing.
Sure. What you just described is what most Arab states did in 48 to Jewish people, and they also did it in 56 after the Suez Crisis, and they did it again in 67 after the Six-Day War. So every Arab state seems to be...
See, again, it just blows past the first point. And, I watched a little bit of this video before I went live, and this whole thing, you realize that all that Destiny has are just these tricks. It's sleight of hand that you wouldn't recognize if you're not paying close attention. Well, let's stick to the claim. The claim is that Palestinians hate Israel because of what Israel did. And again, the evidence is the control variable is Jordan. And Christians. Jordan Arab Muslims don't hate Christians. So it's not a Muslim thing. It's not an Arab thing. It's a response to the Zionist state. And Destiny's rebuttal is to say, oh, but the Arabs did that to Israel too. But the Arabs did that to Jews too. But that's not really an argument. That argument, it's a non sequitur. It does not follow. We're talking about why the Gazans don't like Israel. And History Speaks is ruling out them being Arab Muslim. And Destiny's rebuttal is to say, okay, but Arabs did the same thing. Again, doesn't follow. And right here again, 2 minutes later says the exact same thing. Okay, but the Arab countries responded by doing the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
I agree. We'd have to look at individual cases, but if you want to talk about ethnic cleansing in general terms,
Yeah.
I don't think that's an unreasonable characterization of what happened to the Jewish population.
No, I'm just the only reason. Okay, so in all I barely know anything about this conflict so far. I admit, okay, my knowledge is literally
It's good to read.
yeah, it's 4 or 5 days old. Okay, so I'm very okay.
I'm not disputing your premise. You understand? I'm talking about what preceded it.
Yeah, no, but that's what I'm talking about too, because I think that it's very easy for this conflict to just say what preceded this particular thing, and then stop there. So, for instance, you keep bringing up the 800,000 Arab Palestinians that were expelled in 48, right? Which I think is closer to 700,000. But regardless, for those people that were for those people that were expelled, why were they expelled in 48?
Why were the Arabs expelled?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, so the majority were refugees. A large minority were physically removed. There was a plan called Plan Dalet.
I'm aware.
Which authorized
But what did Plan Dalet come after? What came before Plan Dalet? What came
Plan
before?
Plan Dalet was not a response to Arab policy against indigenous Jews. It was a security measure, essentially.
Yeah, but a security measure for what? Why do they need a security measure, though?
Well, because they're at war. They're at war.
Correct. Okay.
And they also had an ideological vision.
Well,
they did.
That's more contentious. That's more contentious. But
no, I don't think so. I mean,
So Destiny is saying it's contentious that Zionists had an ideological motivation to take land in Israel. That's contentious? So the debate is over right there. Because he's denying that Zionism exists, basically. That they're acting in an organized way to take over the entire mandate of Palestine, which is their stated objective.
But a security measure for what? Why do they need a security measure, though?
Well, because they're at war. They're at war.
Correct. Okay.
And they also had an ideological vision.
Well,
they did.
That's more
contentious.
The Zionists have an ideological vision to take over Israel. Well, that's contentious, is it? It's, for anyone that knows, it's not. And that's not me saying that. Both sides would. No person in the Israel-Palestine debate would say that the Zionists don't have an ideological vision to take over Israel. No one would say that. Nobody would say that that is the case. That's what Zionism is. So, no one is arguing that. Even the Zionists aren't arguing that. They're not, because they're Zionists. That is their ideological vision. So that's crazy. Because Destiny, and notice how he doesn't even make a claim. He does a slippery thing where he says, well, I don't know anything. I'm not making any claims. What I will say, though, is that when it comes to this conflict, everybody wants to start at an arbitrary point. Because, of course, this thing is a tit for tat. There's this feud, and so it's reciprocal. The Israelis don't like the Arabs don't like the Israelis, and so what Destiny is saying is more trying to figure out who's in the right and who's justified to feel angry. He's saying that the Palestinian side starts at an arbitrary point. What he's effectively saying is that the Palestinians started it. He's saying that when the Palestinians say that Hamas is justified in Al-Aqsa flood on October 7th, he said it's arbitrary to say that that's justified by the occupation of Gaza. He says because Gaza was occupied because of the Intifada. And the Intifada started because Israel took over. And it goes all the way back to the very beginning and says, and he's basically saying that when the Palestinians pick an arbitrary point where Israel started the conflict, he says they're not going all the way back. Now, here's the problem. He says, basically, if he's denying that Zionism exists, and Zionism is the intention by European Jews to create a Jewish state in the Levant. Now, they considered other places. They considered Texas, they considered Zimbabwe, they considered Paraguay or Uruguay, but they settled on the Levant. They settled on Palestine. And this is in the first Zionist conference in Basel, Switzerland. They said that we're going to go and deliberately immigrate to Palestine, and they brokered a deal with the Balfour Declaration to get the foreign minister of the United Kingdom or Great Britain at that time to say that there should be a Jewish state in the Middle East, and on and on. And there's a lot of other history that happens there. But the point is there, when Destiny says, if you go back far enough, it's the Palestinians' fault. And then he says that there is no ideological vision on the part of the Jews to take over the Holy Land. You lose the debate right from the beginning, because that's factual. That is uncontested. It is unquestionable that the Zionists, what is Zionism? The Zionists had the intention of creating a Jewish state in the Middle East. So when he says, if you go far back enough, it's not the Israelis' fault, and you can only find fault with the Israelis if you choose an arbitrary date. If you go back far enough, it's not their fault. It's because the Muslims didn't want them there. But then he says, oh, well, actually, no, the Israelis didn't want to create a Jewish state. What? Or rather, the Zionists didn't want to create an Israeli state. That's just totally wrong. So, there you go again.
That's more contentious, but...
No, I don't think so. I mean, I don't think so. So, now, did they have a vision of actually physically removing them from the beginning? That is contentious. I actually wouldn't even agree with that. Did they have a vision of taking the land by some means? They did. Absolutely. You get this with Theodore Herzl, for example. Theodore Herzl said something to the effect of, we must expropriate the land.
Sure. I don't care about Herzl. I understand.
Let me clarify, because I don't want to, because some Palestinians exaggerate this quote. He said we have to abide by property rights and so on. But they had a vision and practice for decades of buying up land from absentee landowners, often Turks, and then expelling the propertyless peasants from it.
Sure.
So they were, now, that's different than what happened in 1950, which is just theft of land, really.
Sure.
I mean, they just said, you can come back. So it's within the bounds of property rights, but it is bound to antagonize the population. And in fact, in 1939, the British Empire turned against Zionism in the White Paper, in large part because, first of all, there was an Arab revolt.
And he made a key point here. He said that, and we watched it on Destiny stream from today when Destiny says, they just bought the land. So what? People can buy land. Why is it unethical for Israeli settlers to buy land, or Jewish settlers at that time to buy land? And History Speaks says, well, that tends to antagonize the population. There's an ideological vision starting in the late 19th century to take the land, to settle the land, to take the land, and to create a new state. They do that. Arab Palestinians don't like that because their land is being purchased and they're getting removed from it. Now, Destiny is saying there is no ideological vision to take over the land, and he's saying that there's nothing inherently wrong with buying land. And this is how he comes up. And by the way, those two ideas are how you come up with the theory that the only reason anyone hates Israel is because they just hate him for being Jewish. All the Jews did was start buying up some land. They didn't have a plan, and there was nothing wrong with them buying it. Then out of nowhere, the Arabs attacked. So yeah, if you deny the sort of central premise, which is that Jews intended on settling an already occupied land, a land that already has inhabitants, then you're right. But that's sort of the whole point. So
an armed
that's crazy.
Revolt.
Yeah, from 36 to 39.
Argument.
Yep.
And it just goes to show, by the way, that this isn't even an argument that Zionists would make, because Zionists even know the record better than Destiny. So this is an argument that's made by a person that fundamentally doesn't understand the facts or is denying them. So it's like a dumb argument for Zionism. It's like a dumb argument in defense of Israel. You know, because the Zionist might argue, like, well, the Israelis have a claim to the land because God gave it to them, or we had it 3,000 years, or, you know, we bought it fair and square, you know, or something like that. But this argument is like denying that Zionism exists, which is crazy.
Right, but the British did recognize that while they fought the revolt and lamented what they regard as barbarism and so on, they understood that this situation is not sustainable of allowing all this Jewish migration where they come in, they buy the land, and kick off these unlanded peasants, right? And that's a vision articulated by Herzl. That's essentially what the practice and a vision. So, I mean, I see a continuity between that, even though I wouldn't call that ethnic cleansing. It's in the neighbor because it's lawful, right? They're not like taking arms or buying it, but I see that as kind of part of a spectrum, and I understand why people who aren't, in many cases, weren't literate back then and are just tied to land, seeing them and labor, seeing themselves get kicked off the land, these Palestinian Arabs, that there was resentment and anger, right? You know, so
I don't disagree, but again, like, what precipitated the 48 expulsions? What precipitated the enaction of Plan Dalet?
They had so they had. This was not, look, they wanted, for ideological reasons, as much land as possible with a Jewish majority.
That might be the case, but unfortunately, historically, we don't have that counterfactual, right? We don't know if that's true.
We have statements from them. We have statements from Ben Gurion. Ben Gurion was clearly happy to see the backs of any Arab who left in 48.
Yeah, Ben Gurion also included in a statement of Israeli independence that he would happily live side by side with Arabs. And Ben Gurion and the Yishuv, the pre-Israeli government, also accepted the 47 partition plan that would have had like 55% of the population of Israel being Jewish Arabs and the other 45% being Palestinian Arabs. So we have those things on writing as well, right? It's not I understand that we have that one statement from Ben Gurion, but if we look at the actions that they took prior to the 48 independence, right, there are other statements too, right?
You're talking about the origins of the war, where the Palestinians, where the Arab population does not accept the partition plan. That certainly is true.
Yep.
But I mean, there were two reasons for that. I mean, essentially, the first was that
it just totally. He's just basically denying what transpired, which is that the Israelis came in, they basically stole the land. No, but they bought it. Okay. They're invaders. I mean, that was their intention, was to move there and take over and create a state. I mean, these are total outsiders. These are total foreigners, and their intention was to gobble up enough land and declare the creation of a Jewish state. And the United Nations come in and says, "Hey, Palestinians, you know, time to create a state now that is both significantly Jewish, and the Jews have way more land than you, even though they have a smaller population." So the Palestinians start out, the whole society is Arab Muslim. 95% Arab Muslim, 90% of the land is owned by Arab Muslims. The Jews in 30 or 40 years buy up significant proportion of the land. And then the United Nations come in and says, oh, well, now there's going to be a Jewish state. Now there's going to be a state that's mostly Jewish, and the Jews have most of the land. And the Arabs reject that. And there's a war, and the Israelis expel the Arabs, and Destiny says, gee, why do the Arabs hate the Israelis? Must be because they're anti-Semitic. They didn't have an ideological vision to take the land. Well, they rejected the partition plan. Well, the Israelis bought it legally. It totally misses the forest for the trees. So, that's outrageous.
Violated, in their view, the premise of the UN Charter,
sure,
which accords self-determination to indigenous peoples.
Okay.
And the second of all is
I'm so hungry. Was that it?
Is that the land given to Israel was wildly out of accord with their percentage in the population. So they got more land despite having... They got the majority of the land despite the Arabs having more than twice the population. So, look, you can say war is unjust. I'm not defending the decision to go to war. obviously it was
Well, sure.
a mistake,
I'm not
but
trying to defend
I
any
think
decisions.
there were no rational
Wait. Hold on.
motivating.
I understand. Hold on. I just want to be super clear, okay? I haven't even taken a hard stance. I'm leaning in one direction. I haven't taken a hard
And then does this. Well, I don't have a position.
stance one way or another yet, okay? I'm just saying
I
that
don't have a. All I'm saying is.
issue is I noticed that when people speak about this conflict, a lot of stuff will be brought up, but people choose the stopping point of history in a very peculiar way. For instance, saying that Arab-Palestinian hostility has been fostered by the Israeli state since the ethnic cleansing of 48 ignores what precipitated the ethnic cleansing of 48, which was the Brits leaving and all the Arab countries saying, well, we're going to try to eliminate all the Jewish people here because this, right? And that precipitates the...
What's the evidence that they wanted to...
I love the casual, like, when it comes to claims, for example, that are obvious, like that the Jews wanted to take over the Mandate of Palestine, it's like, well, we don't have a counterfactual. Yeah, we do. They said they wanted it. But they also said other things too. Then when it comes to the 1948 war, it's like, oh, the Arabs were like, fuck this, let's kill them all. Oh, really? Is that what it was?
Exterminate the Jews. This sounds like a national myth to me. I mean, this isn't well supported. They wanted war. Yeah, they did not want the partition plan because they viewed it. Look, they viewed this
Okay, it might not have been the fact that they would have killed all the Jewish people. That could be the case. I don't have a counterfactual. I can't prove that. Okay. But it is strange that when Israel won their war of independence, it was just Jewish people that were punished in every single Arab state, right? It wasn't Israeli supporters or Zionists. It was Jewish people that were punished in every state.
That's just, I'm not saying they would genocide everyone. It's just weird. But then why didn't they kill him? Why did they kill them all? Well, he's pretending it's not a response to the creation of Israel. That's wild.
It could be the fact that all of these surrounding Arab nations that went to war with the newly declared Israel, maybe they would have just like conquered the territory and like made Jews live as whatever citizens there.
Here's what
it's
I
possible,
understand
but...
about this point. So there's two responses I'd make to this. First of all, I agree with you that this is unjustified. Second of all, I don't understand how Palestinians are responsible for what Egyptians did or what Yemenis did and so on in response to the Nakba. And then the third point I'd make is that
wait, give me the points.
So you may ask, why would you talk more about the victims of the Nakba versus these Jews who were chased out of Yemen or Egypt? The answer is that the victims of the Nakba and their ancestors are still in fucking Gaza, or they're in Lebanon with no nationality, or they're stateless in Syria in a refugee camp. Whereas the Mizrahim who were kicked out are in a first world country, Israel, and they're happy there. And I'm glad I don't want them to be removed from the land. But do you understand that like they don't want to go back to Yemen? And why would they, right? They don't want to go back to Egypt. They're happy to be in Israel. So it's like their situation, the consequences of their victimization are no longer being felt.
Yeah, because the Jewish people in Israel fought war after war after war to establish their right to exist. That's the only reason why they have a place to live, right?
Again, just totally not even engaging with the line of reasoning. And I like History Speaks brings it back and says, okay. Like we're sort of getting away from the subject at hand, which is Israel and Palestine, specifically Israel and the Palestinian Gazans. And he says, basically, so what? That Egypt and Syria declared war on Israel. That had nothing to do with the Palestinians. Those were the actions of Arab states. He says, and the fundamental difference between the Arabs declaring war on Israel and Israel declaring war on everybody else is that the Palestinians are in a concentration camp, and they can't, and the ones that were chased off their land during the War of Independence, and so-called War of Independence in 1948, they can't return. But the Israeli, if Destiny wants to make this equivalency and said, oh, well, the Israelis expelled the Palestinians and then the Arab states expelled the Jews. And the guy says, well, that's really neither here nor there because the Arab states are not the Palestinians. He says, but, be that as it may, in 2023, which is the conflict that we're talking about, the Al-Aqsa flood and the ensuing Gaza war, he said the Jews have their own state. They still have the land, and, if they wanted to return, I mean, they wouldn't want to. Israel's a first world country. He says, but Palestinians are basically in an open air concentration camp. Palestinians are not in the same situation. The Palestinians that were driven from their land, they're unwelcome in Egypt. They're unwelcome in Jordan, in Lebanon, and the living conditions of West Bank and Gaza are unbearable. And Destiny comes back and says, but that's because Israel fought for the land. It's like, okay, but one's got nothing to do with the other. And this language like right to exist, that's propaganda. He's going to say, I'm not taking a side. I don't have a position. But Israel has a right to exist. And Israel fought for its right to exist. And the reason that Israel's a first world country is because it has the right to exist. Really, Israel is a first world country and Palestine isn't because Israel fought harder for it? Or because Israel secured a key alliance with the United States through the influence of the Zionist lobby in America, in Washington? What's the reason for that?
Okay, but I don't understand why that's... Okay, so we can talk about like the origins of the 67 war, the Yom Kippur war, and so on, who's to blame. But like,
let's do it. Let's do it. We can talk about the origins of any of those because now I know everything about all of these. Okay, so the Suez Crisis was Egypt. Okay, nationalizing all.
I know this one. The Suez Crisis was Egypt.
Parts of the Suez Canal and then cutting off shipment to Israel, which was not only a violation of the 1888 international agreements to not control traffic through that, but it was also most likely a declaration of war because it probably violated the previous armistice lines that
but it was most likely a declaration of war. There's the weasel words.
Had been established in the 48 war, right? So that was the beginning of the Suez Crisis. Which part of that was Israel's fault?
Okay, in 67, the core fact of the matter is that Israel attacked Egypt, Jordan, and Syria.
Why did Israel? Okay, well we can. Okay, so we'll skip. Okay, we'll go to the 60 war. Why did Israel attack?
Given that Israel attacked, you have to justify to me that they had no alternative moves and that war was imminent.
War was imminent, and that's why they did attack. Let's see. What was the
he doesn't even know. He doesn't even know. Look at him. War was imminent. Really? Why? Okay, let me go to Wikipedia article.
The 6-Day War.
There it is. There it is in my Wikipedia notes.
To the 6-Day War was
I know this one. 1956 was Egypt. So Egypt did a thing, basically that was an act of war. In 67, Israel preemptively attacked Syria and Egypt. Well, but that's because war was imminent. Oh, really? How? Okay, let me go to, I don't know this one. 56, that's Egypt. Okay, what about 67? Well, war was imminent. Really? How? I don't know. Let me check Wikipedia really quickly. There it is, 6-Day War.
Nasser closing the Suez Canal again, which Israel said
and then
would
it goes
be
back to 56.
Cause for war if they try to close off those shipment lanes again. This is exactly what we did with the Suez Crisis almost 10 years earlier.
Okay, so that in your view justified, the Suez matter justified war?
Yeah, of course it does. Closing waterways and shipments? Yeah, of course that justifies war. I think that's internationally recognized as a cause for war. Look. And Egypt literally expelled all the UNEF forces.
I love that, by the way. I think that's internationally recognized as an act of war, man. See, here's what you have to realize. When Destiny does a debate, if you make a claim, he will go through and say, if you don't have a source that says, for example, Zionism. If you don't have a source that says, the leader of Israel said, we're going to kill every Palestinian, blah, 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 well, that we can't entertain that. You cannot enter that in as evidence. We could not possibly infer that the Zionists had an ideological vision to take the land in Palestine. Cannot be, oh, really? Who said it? Oh, really? What's the source? Well, here's who said it. Here's the source. But people said other things. So if you make a claim that is obvious, or even an inference, where you say the Zionists wanted to take over Palestine, nope, I doubt that. But when Destiny says that a preemptive war against Syria and Egypt was necessary, because Nasser took control of the Suez and closed the strait, he says, well, closing waterways is an act of war. I mean, I think like internationally it's recognized as like an act of war. So, and it's always the weasel words. Probably, I think, maybe it basically like an act of war.
Forces there. They got rid of all the UN peacekeepers. They closed the canal and they started establishing tiered, layered military lines. So of course, what do you think is going to happen, right? They were building up troops. They were getting ready to invade, obviously, because Nasser's not stupid. 10 years earlier, they literally fought a war over exactly this thing, right? So of course he knows by closing it again, there's going to be another conflict. That's why he's preparing for it.
Yeah, I don't regard the disputes over the rights of Israeli shipping to pass through Suez and the Red Sea to justify a preemptive war. And I think you're very naive if you don't look at the ideological...
That's totally true, by the way. This happens all the time. Where the Strait of Hormuz is obstructed or there's an embargo and there's not wars over this. It's not the idea that it's a no-brainer that would be that would justify a preemptive war is just ridiculous. And it goes to show that he knows nothing about history.
Interest. So do you accept that Israel had an ideological interest in expansion to the territory they call... No, I want to answer this.
Wait, you made one claim, just as a real quick thing. If you said that you don't consider the closing of shipping lanes as a cause for war, that's fine. You're alone there. Your answer there is ahistorical, and throughout all of history, the closing and fighting over shipping lanes has been absolutely huge parts about...
Oh my gosh. Listen to the way he talks. I want to write out exactly what he says so you can see how retarded it sounds, because maybe it would be hard to realize how stupid it is unless you see it written down. Where's like an app where I can write something here in text? Whoops. How about this? Oh, this is from, wow, it's saved from when I did my space on that, or when I did the stream on that Twitter space. I want to go to, I want to write exactly what he says because it's crazy.
About why we go to war with people and why people...
Ideological interest in expansion
to
the territory they call... No, I want to answer this.
Wait, you made one claim, just as a real quick thing. If you said that you don't consider the closing of shipping lanes as a cause for war, that's fine. You're alone there. Your answer there is ahistorical, and throughout all of history, the closing and fighting over shipping lanes has been absolutely huge parts about why we go to war with people and why people go to war. So this...
Let me slow it down a little bit here because he's going too fast.
Closing and fighting over shipping lanes has been absolutely huge parts about why we go to war with people and why people go to war. So this is a very big deal. It's closing free travel.
Okay. So if you literally just slow down what he says... Whoops, let's do this. Make it more legible. Okay, so this is... Okay. This is your sophisticated person here. Throughout all of history, the closing and fighting over shipping lanes has been absolutely huge parts about why we go to war with people and why people go to war. Throughout all of history, it was a dark and stormy night. Throughout all of history, the closing and fighting over shipping lanes has been absolutely huge parts. These are the weasel words I'm talking about. Absolutely. Absolutely huge parts. It's not absolutely why, it's just absolutely huge parts. Absolutely huge parts. About, not about why. We go to war with people and why people go to war. It's both about why we go to war with people and why people go to war. Fighting over shipping lanes has been fighting over shipping lanes is why people go to war, or closing? So let's just reduce all of this to its simplest form. And let's just say shipping lanes are sometimes part of, let's say, disputes over shipping lanes are a part of, or not, I don't even like a part. I don't even like, it's absolutely huge parts. Let's just say partially, or are sometimes part of a justification for war. Well, let's rephrase it, okay? Because that's really what he's saying. Throughout all of history, closing and fighting over shipping lanes. When you say closing and fighting, what you really mean when you say closing and fighting, this is a way to water down what you're saying. And this is the trick, is that he's never actually saying anything concrete. Because if he were to say closing shipping lanes causes people to go to war, that would be a state, like let's write that down. If you were to say closing shipping lanes causes war, then you could dispute that. And you could say, well, no, because here's an instance where it didn't cause war. Here's an instance where it was resolved diplomatically. So you can't say closing shipping lanes causes war. So you have to say something like closing and fighting to make it less specific. Closing and fighting. So it's not just closing, it's, well, any disputes involving shipping could be a cause for war. Closing and fighting over shipping lanes causes war. But you know what? That's also too concrete. So you have to say something like, closing and fighting over shipping lanes is part of why people go to war. So let's make it even less specific. And let's say, well, it's not just closing shipping lanes. It's any disputes involving shipping lanes are why people go to war. Well, but that's not always the whole thing. It's part of why people go to war. And then you add in these other words. So you add in these, like, this is the weasel words. Fighting over, can I not do italics? Gay. Seriously, what kind of fucking notes app is this? How can I edit this? Whatever. So closing and fighting, this is a way to make it less specific. Part of makes it less specific. Now that's phase one, okay? This is like what a real claim would be. And this would be adding, or rather subtracting specificity. This is called obfuscation. Then you add in these words that make it sound like you're certain. These are words that add certainty and make it sound like you're very convinced of it. That's where you add in throughout all of history. Closing and fighting over shipping lanes has been absolutely huge parts about why people go to war. Do you see what's happening here? Let's make this in caps though, so you can see. And this is the Destiny guide to debating, okay? Because he's trying to make a claim about the Suez Canal crisis or about the 67 war, and he's saying that closing the Suez Canal and blocking off the Strait of Tiran, he says that necessitated Israel to go to war with Egypt in both cases because that is a cause for war. Now, what his claim is is that disputes, and the guy says, well, I don't know if I agree. I don't know if I agree that Nasser closing the Strait of Tiran, I don't know if that necessarily justifies Israel's war. It could be a pretext. That's the counter argument. So let's say argument. Nasser's blockade of Strait of Tiran necessitated a preemptive war. An offensive preemptive war. Okay? Here's the counter argument. The blockade doesn't necessarily justify or warrant a preemptive war. Now, here is Destiny's reasoning, okay? Now, this is the reasoning for the argument. Well, the reasoning is, well, if you disagree that a blockade doesn't warrant or justify war, no one believes that. You're alone. Everyone, I think he said that before. What did he say? You're alone.
And just as a real quick thing, if you said that you don't consider the closing of shipping lanes as a cause for it, that's fine. You're alone there.
You're alone there. So you have this appeal to consensus. Everyone believes a blockade necessitates and justifies preemptive wars, because that's what it is. We're not talking about we're talking about a preemptive offensive war. So first he says, well, maybe you have your counter argument, but no one believes your counter argument, which is not a real argument.
Your answer there is ahistorical, and throughout all of history.
And then we get this beauty. Then we get this. Throughout all of history, close it. Then we get, this is the actual text. Okay, this is the original statement. Or what, I don't know what we call this. Reasoning. Oh, shit. Okay. Throughout all of history, since the beginning of time, throughout all of history, the closing and fighting over shipping lanes has absolutely been huge parts about why we go to war with people and why people go to war. Now, again, what's the actual meaning in here? What does he mean? What do these words mean? He says disputes over shipping lanes, because that closing and fighting means disputes. Not necessarily just closing, but any fighting over shipping lanes, which is a dispute. Because there are disputes. There is disputes over all of it. Who has fishing rights and who has sovereignty over that, or there's diplomatic reasons why someone might close a strait or a canal. So he's saying any dispute. It's not just closing one, it's fighting. Closing and fighting over shipping lanes, which means disputes, has been huge parts, about why people go to war. So what he means is disputes over shipping lanes sometimes are part of a justification for war. Now this reasoning doesn't prove the argument. To say Nasser's blockade of the Strait of Tiran necessitates an offensive preemptive war, why? Because sometimes disputes over shipping lanes are part of why people go to war. Okay, but that doesn't actually prove what you said. It actually has nothing to do with what you said. You need to prove why it was necessary and how it justifies a preemptive war. To say, no one's saying that you could go to war over that. You could go to war over a lot of things. The Soviet Union could have went to war with the United States over Gary Powers and the U-2 plane. Could have gone to war over the Cuban Missile Crisis. Could have gone to war over whatever. But you're saying that Israel had to go to war. They were forced. Israel has no expansionist agenda. Israel does not have an ideological vision to take over Palestine. They were forced to. They had to go to war. They had to fight in 56. They had to fight in 67. It was necessary. Why? Because sometimes disputes over shipping lanes cause war. But then you add in the weasel words, and this is how Destiny argues. You add in weasel words that... So first, you obfuscate and say, well, it's not just closing, because that's what happened, was a closure. It's closing and fighting, and it's not just why people go to war, it's part of why people go to war. But then you add certainty. Even though you're obfuscating, even though you're not really saying anything, you're just absolutely certain of it. And I know I'm kind of blocking this right now. Can I do this? Okay. So then you add certainty and say, well, throughout all of history, it's been an absolutely huge part, but it's a part. Absolutely huge. It's a part. You're saying it's a partial justification for war. Absolutely huge part. So you're saying it's a maybe primary or secondary, but it's a part. In other words, you're not saying countries have to go to war over the closure of the strait, of one strait. You're saying that disputes over shipping lanes is sometimes part of why people go to war. But it's happened throughout all of history, and it's absolutely huge, And this is what I'm talking about when I say weasel words. Weasel words. It's like this is, so that's a statement that he made. The guy says, well, I disagree that Nasser closing the strait necessitated preemptive war. And Destiny says, well, my counter argument is that everyone believes it. Okay, you're citing what? Nothing. Everyone believes it. Source? No source. Everyone believes you're wrong, okay? And the reasoning? Well, sometimes disputes over shipping routes are why countries go to war. Okay, not an argument. Not an argument.
Closing and fighting over shipping lanes has been absolutely huge parts about why we go to war with people and why people go to war. So
I love in the totally extraneous. This is why we go to war with people and why people go to war. You see the... It's like a palindrome. This is why we go to war and why people go to war. Okay. So you're saying nothing. You're just filling up air with fucking crap.
A very big deal is closing free travel to certain countries. So I just want to establish that. Now, if you think it's not a cause for war, that's fine. Even though you said it yourself, you brought up in 56, there was the Suez Crisis. It was literally fought over this, right? But okay, so 10 years later, the same thing happens. Okay, now go ahead to your point. I just want to establish that. Go ahead.
Okay, so yeah, the moral question of whether the 67 wars...
What did he establish? You established what? That disputes over shipping lanes are again, this is the argument and counter argument. This is what you fucking wait, before we go on, I need to establish one thing. Sometimes countries go to war partially over shipping routes. Now you may proceed. But, these idiots that watch the stream, they hear shit like throughout all of history and absolutely huge. And they're like, oh yeah, sounds good to me.
Justified or not, we disagree on. It's not of great interest to me.
Wait. How is that not a great interest?
Chat of chats says establish a presupposition. That's exactly.
That's a really important war. That's where Israel expanded their territory in 3 directions, right?
They call no. I want to answer this.
Wait. You made one claim just as a real quick thing. If huge parts about why we go to war with people and why people go to war. So this is a very big.
And I love how he says it like he knows too. This is why people go to war. So let me I'm the expert here. Let me establish countries go to war over shipping sometimes. Now that we established that.
Deal is closing free travel to certain countries. So I just want to establish that. Now, if you think
it's not about travel, it's not even about travel. You think it's about travel? It's about trade, idiot.
Closing and fighting over shipping lanes has been absolutely huge parts about why we go to war with people and why people go to war. So this is a very big deal, is closing free travel to certain countries.
Free travel. It's not travel.
I just want to establish that. Now, if you think it's not a cause for war, that's fine. Even though you said it yourself, you brought up in 56, there was the Suez Crisis. It was literally fought over this, right? But okay, so 10 years later, the same thing happens.
Even that part, what does that even mean? Even though you literally brought it up. Brought up what? What everybody knows is the Suez Crisis is about the Suez Canal. Yeah. So what? Again, it's just adding stuff that it's not, he's not saying anything. You know, so first he says, again, everyone believes this. Well, you're alone, everyone believes this. Then he says something, again, a presuppositional statement. Then he says, well, even you said that the Suez Canal crisis was over the Suez Canal. Whoa, mic drop. Mic drop and the Suez Canal. So here's the argumentation. Argument one, nobody agrees with you. Argument two, sometimes that's part of a justification for war. And part three, the Suez Canal crisis was about the Suez Canal. So, like, this is the argument. Nobody agrees with you. Sometimes the Suez Canal crisis is about the Suez Canal. Now you can continue. Now that we've established this, let's go on.
Okay, now go ahead to your point. I just want to establish that. Go ahead.
Okay, so, yeah, the moral question of whether the 67 war is justified or not, we disagree on. It's not of great interest to me.
Wait. How is that not a great interest? That's a really important war. That's where Israel expanded their territory in 3 directions, right?
Now it's just like, this is a guy who clearly has no idea what he's talking about. So now he's just like throwing out things we already know. What History Speaks is saying is, okay, when it comes to the moral case about Israel versus Palestine, the actual precipitating causes of the war aren't actually that important. He goes, wait, but the 1967 war was important. So again, History Speaks says precipitating causes are less relevant than the moral case. Whoops. And then there's Stephen Bonnell. The 1967 war was important. It's like you're arguing with a little baby. It's like literally like you're arguing with a baby. The precipitating causes of the 1967 war are less relevant than the moral case for the Palestinians. Wait, but the 1967 war was important. You know, but 9/11 was a national tragedy. That's crazy. It's like you're literally arguing with a baby, because clearly what Destiny heard is like the 1967 war is not important or something.
That's a really important war. That's where Israel people go to war. So this is a very big deal, is closing free travel to certain countries. So I just want to establish that. Now, if you think it's not a cause for war, that's fine. Even though you said it yourself, you brought up in 56, there was the Suez Crisis. It was literally fought over this, right? But okay, so 10 years later, the same thing happens. Okay, now go ahead to your point. I just want to establish that. Go ahead.
Okay, so, yeah, the moral question of whether the 67 war is justified or not, we disagree on.
It's not a moral justification. Oops. Regardless, the precipitating causes are less relevant than the moral cause. Wait, but the war was important.
Great interest to me.
Wait. How is that not a great interest? That's a really important war. That's where Israel expanded their territory in 3 directions, right?
So you see how he just clearly didn't even listen to what the guy said. Because the guy said, the precipitating causes are not as important as the moral justification. And what Destiny heard is the 1967 war isn't important. So he's not even listening.
That's a really, yeah.
And then he's done. He's like, yeah, the 1967 war? Let me check Wikipedia. Wait a second. Hang on really quickly. The war when Israel expanded in 3 directions? That is important, yeah.
So I think the starting of the 67 wars, I think is pretty important, right?
Well, we have an ethical disagreement on whether this dispute over this blockade over access to international waters justifies starting a war. I do not agree on this.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you don't think that Egypt had an interest in going to war again with Israel? You don't think they had it there?
Of course they did. They hated Israel.
Okay, so they blockaded their straits.
There's no evidence. Look, Israel did not. Israel. Here's my position.
Okay.
First of all, we have a normative disagreement we just talked about. I don't think, since normative disagreements are often insoluble, I don't think it's very interesting to go back and forth on that.
Okay.
Here's my perception of the 67 war.
Okay.
Israel wanted to expand. They were provoked by the Suez issue. They had a deep ideological commitment to expansion. They think the land is theirs. They think God gave them the land and so on.
No, they think God gave them the Sinai Peninsula?
Yes, they do.
Okay.
No, not the Sinai Peninsula, but like the West Bank and the Golan Heights, for example.
Wait, but the West Bank and the Golan Heights have nothing to do with Egypt
but they
closing.
didn't just attack Egypt. They didn't just attack Egypt. Their preemptive war was in multiple directions.
That was only because those other countries had signed defensive pacts with Egypt. They told Jordan, they literally explicitly told Hussein, they said, please don't attack us in Jerusalem. And Hussein said, f it, I'm going to. And that's why Egypt invaded the West Bank afterwards and took that land. Now, we might say, well, Egypt or Israel would have.
Fuck it, I'm going to. I love when Redditors argue like this. And then Nasser was like, fuck it, I'm going to invade.
Sinai Peninsula?
Yes, they do.
Okay.
No, not the Sinai Peninsula, but like the West Bank and the Golan Heights, for example.
Wait, but the West Bank and the Golan Heights have nothing to do with Egypt
but they
closing.
didn't
And
just
again, do you understand how we're 20 minutes in? And what History Speaks keeps saying is that the Zionists have an ideological agenda, which is expansion. And there's a word for that. It's called maximalism. They are Jewish maximalists. They want as much territory as possible. And then we keep getting away from that. Like he tried, like before this ridiculous bullshit, History Speaks said, okay, but actually it's about the fact that Israel wants to expand. And he said, but actually closing shipping lanes is a cause for war. And he said, yeah, well, actually, I'm less interested in that. I'm more interested about the moral justification. But the Suez Canal crisis about the Suez Canal. The 67 war was important. And it keeps coming back to Destiny doesn't want to have the conversation about the fact that Zionists want to expand. Like in other words, the idea that there are causes for the war other than the nominal causes, he doesn't want to have that discussion. The idea that potentially the so-called justification for war is a pretext, he's not interested in that. But that's the debate that History Speaks is trying to have. He's saying that, be that as it may, that Nasser closed the Suez Canal, be it as it may that he closed the Strait of Tiran. He said the Israelis are using these as opportunities to expand because they have an ideological agenda, which is maximal Jewish territory, like they have from the beginning. And Destiny keeps watering it down by saying, well, when the Israelis settle Palestine, they're just buying land. And when they expel the Palestinians, well, they had to because the Arabs declared war. And when the Israelis go to war in 56 and 67, well, they had to because they closed the Strait of Tiran and they attack Syria because they're in an alliance. Ignoring the possibility that maybe that's a pretext. Maybe they're taking advantage of the situation, which is what History Speaks is saying.
They didn't just attack Egypt. Their preemptive war was in multiple directions.
That was only because those other countries had signed defensive pacts with Egypt. They told Jordan, they literally explicitly told Hussein, they said, please don't attack us in Jerusalem. And Hussein said, f it, I'm going to. And that's why...
Fuck it. Hussein had to attack because his people would revolt. He didn't want to, but he had to.
Egypt invaded the West Bank afterwards and took that...
So that's just wrong. So that's just casually wrong. Hussein said he would invade, and then he was like, fuck it. Did Hussein say, fuck it? Or was Nasser hugely popular and visited Amman And when he did, the Jordanian king realized that Nasser was more popular than he was, so he had to join Nasser's war. Or did he say, fuck it. Never mind. I wasn't going to go to war, but screw it. Now I am.
Land. Now, we might say, well, Egypt or Israel would have taken that land anyway. They would have won it anyway. We don't know that, though, because unfortunately, we can never know because Jordan decided to attack with Egypt.
Here's how we know better than the...
That's just dumb. That's just dumb. He's saying, well, maybe they would have taken the land regardless of the pretext that they created to take the land. I guess we'll never know. Whoops. No takesies backsies. The Arabs invaded and gave Israel an excuse to take it. Now we have no way of discerning whether Israel wanted the land to begin with. That's crazy, dude. It's just like, honestly, you can only watch this stuff if you're a complete idiot. If you're a completely ignorant retard. Destiny has studied this conflict for 5 days and dismantled every talking point. What? What? In what way did that happen? When he had to look up what the 6-Day War was in the middle of the debate?
Origins of the 6-Day War, whether you think they're morally justified or not, which we disagreed on that.
Sure.
I don't think Israel showed an interest in negotiation. I don't think Israel wanted to involve the international community. I think they rushed to war for expansionist reasons. We have a disagreement on that.
Sure, but to be clear, you have no proof of any of that, and I can show you tons of proof on the other side.
I do. No, I have massive proof of this. That Israel had a vision, that Israeli leaders for decades had a vision of expansion to Judea, what they call Judea and Samaria, and the Golan Heights. Of course, I have proof of this.
Okay, well, you know what would have been really good then for Arab strategy?
He's literally typing and looking stuff up right now.
Okay.
But no, wait. This is so easy. This is such an easy thing. Okay, this is what the Arabs should have done then.
Arab. So History Speaks says that the Jewish leaders have talked about taking over all of Palestine for 100 years. Now let's hear what Destiny's rebuttal is. So he's saying, if you're following these two arguments, History Speaks, and this would be my position as well, is that clearly the Zionists from the beginning, from the late 19th century, had an intention of taking over all of Palestine. And there are very extreme elements inside the Israeli government, maximalists, and they wanted everything even east of the Jordan River. They wanted even what's now the state of Jordan. And some wanted more than that. You know, some want Iraq and the Sinai, and some want all of it. And so what History Speaks is saying that when Israel goes to war in 56 and when they go to war in 67, the reason that they give for the war is a pretext. They want to expand. When Israel seizes the Sinai and Israel seizes the Golan and the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, this is part of their long plan, which is to take over that entire territory. Not necessarily Sinai, but Golan they still have, the Gaza Strip and the West Bank they still occupy. And so the point is that Israel's not fighting defensive wars, although they're being put in situations where they're confronting Arab countries. They're using these as excuses to take land. And Destiny says, well, the Arabs shouldn't have attacked them. But that doesn't engage with the idea that the Jews from the beginning have had a maximalist, expansive agenda. That's the expansionist agenda. That's the point.
Okay, for their geopolitical...
And here's the fundamental. When we talk about the people in the Gaza Strip and whether they feel justified in attacking Israel, Destiny's argument is that there is no legitimate grievance against Israel. That Israel is a fool. Israel wandered in there and bought up land and said, oh, I guess we have land. Oh, let's make a deal. Uh-oh, the Arabs hate us for no reason. Now we got to kill them all. Oh, we have to lock them in a concentration camp because they keep throwing rocks at us. Whoops. And so, in other words, the argument about Israel-Palestine comes down to, you know, who has legitimate claim, who has legitimate grievance. And Destiny says the Muslims have no legitimate grievance because there has never been an agenda to deprive them of their land. The counter-argument is that the Israelis have antagonized and provoked the entire Muslim world by settling and taking the land and then expanding. And by the way, being a very provocative state and conducting assassinations and and sending, like, bombing Syria and doing all these kinds of things, putting civilian settlements in the West Bank since 1967. And so that's the argument is Israel a state that is hated for being Jewish and they have to defend themselves? Or are they a belligerent actor in the region? They have this agenda. It has alienated them from these other countries, and these other countries have legitimate beef with Israel. That's why he keeps coming back to and saying, well, but the Zionists from the beginning had an agenda to take Judea and Samaria as the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. They don't call it Palestine. They don't call it the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. They call it Judea and Samaria, because they see that as ancient Israel, ancient Jewish land. They have the intention, because they reject calling it the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, that means their intention is to incorporate it. They don't recognize that it's Palestinian. They don't recognize that it's Arab or Muslim. They see it as future Israel. So when they do these maneuvers like the current Gaza war, it's not about attacking Hamas. It's about integrating what they see as rightful Jewish land in the future. And they will push people off the land to do that. And then the people that get pushed off are going to hate them forever, and they're kind of justified in hating them. But Destiny says, oh no, they weren't pushed off because of this agenda. They were pushed off because they were terrorists. They had to be pushed off. They attacked Israel first because they hate Jews. That's what the debate is about. Now, he's going to answer this and say that the Arabs shouldn't have ever attacked. That should have been their strategy. But, well.
Strategy. And the whole world, including the United States and Britain, by the way, would have been on their side. If they think that Israel has territorial conquest on the mind, they should have waited for them to do territorial conquest.
Do you deny that okay, so even today, what would you make of so you've talked about international norms and so on to try to justify the 67 war. Mm-hmm. Surely you'd agree that the fourth, if you've been reading up on this, and this is the United States position for decades before Trump, that Israel's settlement in the occupied territories in breach of UN 242, which they had agreed to, you would surely agree that this is a war crime under and that's not a moralistic term. That's just a violation of the 14th Geneva Convention. Civilian settlements in occupied territory are a war crime. One and two, this is obviously revanchist and ideological in nature. They call the West Bank Judea and Samaria. That's an evocation of ancient history.
Whether
that's not Western values.
Wait, am I going to answer this question, or wait, you asked me a question?
No. I want to make a rhetorical point. Then I'll shut up for a bit.
Okay.
It is not Western values to say we need to commit war crimes and expand to occupied territory, which we agreed to leave because of God or ancient history. But go ahead.
Okay, I don't know when they agreed to leave the occupied territories. Maybe I haven't gotten up to that. I haven't done a thorough reading of the Camp David stuff or the Oslo Accords yet. So maybe they agreed to leave.
Oh my gosh, dude. He didn't get to that part yet. It's like, bro. It's like it's a novel. I didn't get to that chapter yet. I didn't get to Oslo Accords or Camp David. Bro. I didn't get to 1979 yet. What? So his knowledge of Israel and Palestine is up to date in the 70s. He's up to, if he didn't get to Camp David yet, I guess he's at what, 73? Did he get to Anwar Sadat being assassinated yet? He's at 73. Presumably he's at the I don't even know if he's at the Yom Kippur War yet. He didn't get to Oslo. He didn't get to Camp David. Did he get to the Yom Kippur War yet? Or is he still on the 6-Day War? I don't know. His knowledge is as recent as 1967, I guess. Because I assume if he didn't get to Camp David, maybe he got to Yom Kippur, but I don't know. We haven't gotten to Yom Kippur yet. So he's at, I think his knowledge is stuck at 1967. It's current in 67.
There, and they haven't, so I haven't gotten up to that point yet.
They agreed to UN 242.
Okay.
And also in 68.
Wait a second. Hold on. Yeah. You said UN Resolution 242. Was that the same UN resolution that also...
I love his face when he does this. Hold on. Is that thing I read on Wikipedia about yesterday?
So called for every Arab surrounding state to recognize Israel's existence and their borders?
Correct, and Egypt has done so.
Egypt has and Jordan has, and any other Arab countries? Do you see the problem?
Do you see the problem? Hey, dipshit. I know geography isn't your strong suit, but this is a map.
Okay, so so I understand. So yes, okay. So now you
West
asked me.
Bank was Jordanian. How does the West Bank?
Look at the live chat. Ha ha ha! Ain't no way! Oh snap! BTFO! Wait, is this the same UN 242 where the surrounding Arab countries agreed to recognize Israel and normalize ties? And he goes, well, yeah, they did. Egypt and Jordan did. And Destiny goes, Egypt and Jordan and who else? Okay, this is a map of the Middle East. So there's Egypt, there's Jordan. So in other words, and by the way, this is the occupied West Bank and this is the Gaza Strip. So let's look at the border of the Gaza Strip. That's Egypt. That's Israel. That's the Eastern Mediterranean Sea. And this is the borders of the West Bank. That's Israel. That's Jordan. Okay? But this is your big own. Oh, okay. Well, Israel agreed to leave, or I should say stop expanding civilian settlements, West Bank and Gaza Strip, until surrounding Arab countries normalize ties. Oh, but only Egypt and Jordan normalize ties. Okay, but that's who borders Israel. That's who borders the occupied territories. That's crazy.
Justified, though. The West Bank was Jordanian.
It was Jordanian. Why did they lose it?
Jordan has normalized ties with Israel. They are now a bloc.
Yeah, and that's the point. Jordan occupied the West Bank. Egypt occupied Gaza. Both those countries border the occupied territories.
To get out of the West Bank.
That's fine.
And look at the live chat. BTFO. But what about this other thing? Like I said, fucking idiots that watch this.
Fine, okay, that they have normalized ties. I don't know what the agreement is going to look like on giving that territory back, but historically, during the 6-Day War.
And then Destiny goes, okay, fine. Maybe they did recognize Israel. Again, he would be forgiven for not knowing that because Camp David, and he didn't get to Camp David, and normalization of Jordan happened 20 years later. So, Destiny can be forgiven for not knowing that because in his chapter, Jordan and Egypt haven't normalized ties yet.
To get out of the West Bank.
That's fine, okay? That they have normalized ties. I don't know what the agreement is going to look like on giving that territory back, but historically, during the 6-Day War, the West Bank was used to stage war against Israel, okay? Not just during the 6-Day War, but in the decades prior to that, with Palestinian attacks back and forth coming from that territory. Right? Number one. So that's Israel's justification of the 6-Day War for capturing it for quote unquote security concerns. Okay. Number two, all of this territory from the western part of Jordan has been used to attack Israel, right? That's where the PLO started. PLO got so big and violent there, led by Arafat, they literally tried to assassinate Hussein twice, and they tried to...
Where is the PLO done since 2005?
And again, now this is all just irrelevant. Let's go back to the notepad, okay? Let's go back to the notepad. So we reach an impasse on the precipitating causes of the Suez Crisis and the 67 war. So History Speaks says, well, surely you'd agree that if closing of Strait of Tiran constitutes an act of war, in 1956, then you'd agree that civilian settlements in the West Bank, legal war crime, also constitutes an act of war. Because that was the argument. Destiny said, well, closing shipping lanes is a legitimate cause for war. He said that Israel has a right to attack the Arab neighbors because of Nasser's actions, because Nasser's closing. Throughout history, disputes over shipping routes are a cause for war. So that means Israel has a right to go to war. So History Speaks responds as well, if you would agree that closing a shipping route constitutes an act of war, that's a sufficient casus belli. He says then what about the West Bank? In the West Bank, Israel has not only militarily occupied the West Bank since 1967, but they've also put civilian settlements, meaning they don't just have the military controlling the security of the West Bank, but they also have civilians coming in and buying land and creating communities. Which, by the way, that's like the definition of a colony. That'd be like if when the United States invades Iraq, Americans start moving there and creating communities and saying this is now part of the United States. That'd be like if we invaded Afghanistan and the United States was sending Americans to go and build condominiums and suburban housing projects, and they started saying this is now an American city. So civilian settlements, again, and History Speaks says it and it's true, this is internationally condemned by the United Nations. This is against American policy. It's been the position of every American president since 1967 to condemn the civilian settlements, and it's by definition a war crime. So History Speaks says if closing the Strait of Tehran is a war crime, then civilian settlements in the West Bank are a war crime by definition. And therefore, that gives these other countries a right to go to war with Israel. So Destiny jumps in and says, and he tries to muddle the waters about 242. And this is again where the debating sophistry comes in, because HS also says, he says, well, Israel agreed in UN 242 to leave the West Bank. Stephen Bonnell says, but UN 242 also said that Arab countries must recognize Israel. HS says, well, but Jordan and Egypt, which occupied the West Bank and Gaza, did recognize Israel. And then Bonnell says, okay, fine, but the West Bank and Gaza were used to stage, well, he said to stage war. I'll say attacks because I'm literate. And then what did he say right after that? I forget. It was a minute ago.
History from half a century ago.
Okay, maybe listen, I'm being honest, okay? I haven't.
18 years, the last 18 years are justified because of this history from half a century ago.
Western part of Jordan has been used to attack Israel, right? That's where the PLO started. PLO got so.
And then he says, okay. So again, here's how he argues. Here's how it's not just about the thing in itself, but it's also about the debating. So HS says, well, if closing the Strait of Tehran constitutes an act of war, you'd agree that civilian settlements in the West Bank, which are a legal war crime, also constitutes an act of war. And then he adds on, and this was unnecessary, this should not have been said. He said, but Israel agreed, and also Israel even agreed to UN 242 to leave the West Bank. Now, here's the tactic that Stephen Bonnell, does, is he sort of isolates the weakest argument, right? That's what's happening here. Because what History Speaks is saying, he's drawing a comparison and making an if-then statement. If, in your opinion, if in your normative opinion, it is wrong for Nasser to close the Strait of Tehran and shut down or nationalize the Suez Canal, if that justifies war by Israel, well, the occupied territories constitutes a war crime because civilian settlements are by definition a war crime. Even Israel agrees. Now, Bonnell jumps in and he ignores the fact that the West Bank settlements are illegal. He ignores the fact that that he's basically been checkmated here. If you think closing the Strait of Tehran is an act of war, well, the civilian settlements are just as bad, if not worse. So why does that not justify war by the Arabs or by the Palestinians? But Bonnell doesn't engage with that. Destiny doesn't engage with that. He isolates this part and says, well, wait a second, but didn't UN 242 also say this? And History Speaks says, well, yeah, and that's legit. Didn't it say that yeah, okay, Israel wants to leave the West Bank, but didn't that also include something else? And History, and everyone goes, whoa, BTFO, you just won the argument. He didn't win the argument. Even if this part were deleted, this would still remain. This contradiction would remain. Also, he's wrong, because he isolates this part and introduces new information to make HS look bad and says, well, but didn't that also have another stipulation, which was met? And he says, well, yes, Jordan and Egypt did recognize Israel. So Bennell just downplays that. He just dismisses that like it didn't happen. Never mind. So he basically then just gish gallops past that and says, okay, never mind. But the West Bank and Gaza were used to stage attacks against Israel, which has nothing to do with this. It has nothing to do with the point. The point is that the civilian settlements are the West. We're not talking about militarily occupying the West Bank. We're talking about civilian settlements. Understand the difference? We had American military bases in Iraq. We didn't have civilian settlements. We had military bases in Afghanistan. We didn't have civilian settlements. We had military bases in Vietnam. We didn't have civilian settlements. So he says civilian settlements are a war crime. That's illegal. And if all war crimes justify preemptive wars, then Israel's occupation of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip justifies war by the Palestinians. Bennell doesn't engage. He picks out this part and asks a question, which he doesn't know the answer to, and then dismisses it when he hears it. And then he just blows right past and says, okay, but Israel says they're in the West Bank because the West Bank was used to stage attacks against Israel. Okay, but even if the West, it's true, but since the West Bank is used as a staging ground to attack Israel, then you militarily occupy the West Bank. It doesn't mean that it's not a war crime to put civilian settlements. If you put in civilian settlements, they're not going to help. How does putting civilian settlements in the West Bank prevent the West Bank from being used as a staging ground? It's about the military occupation, which nobody has an issue with that, necessarily. Nobody necessarily, the United Nations did not disavow Israel securing Gaza, or rather the West Bank. They had a problem with Israel's civilian settlements in the West Bank. Civilians don't stop the West Bank from being used. The military prevents the West Bank from being used. The civilian settlements are illegal. The military is not. And then he just jumps into information that's totally extraneous and says, well, they had used the West Bank and the PLO is so bad that they almost killed the king of Jordan. Okay, so what? What does that have to do with anything?
Big and violent there, led by Arafat. They literally tried to assassinate Hussein twice.
And listen to his tone. He clearly doesn't know what he's talking about, so then he just talks like he's confident. The PLO is so bad, they almost assassinated the king twice. It's like, that's extraneous information. That's completely extraneous information. That has nothing to do with this. That has nothing to do with civilian settlements. The claim is about illegal civilian settlements in the West Bank, and he's saying, well, the PLO is bad. The PLO is so bad. Okay, I know you're excited. You read the Wikipedia yesterday, but that's extraneous.
And they tried to...
What has the PLO done since 2005 in terms of violence?
I don't know what they've done since 2005, but I'm just telling you that...
So why is it? So settlements for 18 years, the last 18 years are justified because of this history from half a...
And then, HS jumps in and says, okay... Because ostensibly, Bennell is arguing that, whatever Israel does in the West Bank is justified because the PLO is so bad. And HS says, well, the PLO violence is actually down since 2005. Therefore, why does Israel expand settlements in the West Bank? In other words, if Israel has to do civilian settlements in the West Bank, which is nonsensical, then why would they expand settlements when the violence is abating? Why, if the violence is going down, the settlements are going up. So that's not it. And that, by the way, arrives at the fundamental point, which is that Israel has an ideological agenda to expand.
Century ago.
Okay, maybe that. I'm being honest. Okay, I haven't gotten to the last 20 or 30 years of history yet. I'm still working my way up there. But I do know that from the 6-Day War before and on, assassinate Hussein twice, and they tried to.
What has the PLO done since 2005 in terms of violence?
I don't know what they've done since 2005, but I'm just telling you that.
So why is it? So settlements for 18 years.
Or rather, he says PLO hasn't done anything. I misheard him. What has PLO done since 2005? I don't know. I don't know.
Last 18 years are justified because of this history from half a century ago.
Okay, maybe that. Right, that's where the PLO started. The PLO got so big and violent there, led by Arafat, they literally tried to assassinate Hussein twice, and they tried to.
What has the PLO done since 2005 in terms of violence?
I don't know what they've done since 2005, but I'm just telling you that.
So why is it? So settlements for 18 years, the last 18 years are justified because of this history from half a century ago.
Okay, maybe that. I'm being honest. Okay, I haven't gotten to the last 20 or 30 years of history yet. Okay, I'm still working my way up there, but I do know that from the 6-Day War before and onward, the West Bank was a very good staging area for lots of attacks into Israel.
Very good.
Right? I'm gonna guess that if I keep reading, that probably continues to be the case to some extent. Maybe it's not. Okay, maybe it's not.
Oh my God!
My guess is gonna be it's probably
hate this guy. I fucking hate this guy. So what is it? The weasel words at this part is crazy. It's crazy.
Okay, I'm still working my way up there, but I do know that from the 6-Day War before and onward, the West Bank was a very good staging area for lots of attacks into Israel, right? I'm gonna guess that if I keep reading, that probably continues to be the case to some extent. Maybe it's not. Okay, maybe it's not. My guess is gonna be it's probably going to be.
Do you think? Do you think civilian? No. But why are this is a big
I mean, really. So he's lost the debate twice now. He's already lost that. We're halfway through about, no, not even. Oh, we're a quarter of the way through. He's lost the debate twice, okay? And I'll scroll up here so you could see. But so this is the second part where he lost. So History Speaks says, you would agree that if since closing the Strait of Tiran constitutes an act of war in your mind, then the war crime of the civilian settlements is also an act of war. Even Israel agreed that it's an act of war. Or rather, even Israel agreed to leave and evacuate those settlements. Benel isolates that part and says, well, but that also said that the Arab countries would have to recognize Israel. Okay, History Speaks says they did. Benel says, okay, fine. But the West Bank and Gaza were used to stage attacks against Israel in 1967. And the PLO was so bad, they assassinated the king of Jordan. History Speaks as, well, okay, but what has the PLO done since 2005? And therefore, because the settlements have been an ongoing problem from 67 to today. So in other words, he's saying, yeah, maybe the PLO was a problem from 1948 to 67 and afterward. But what have they done in the last 18 years? In other words, if civilian settlements are justified by the barbarity of the PLO, where's the PLO been for 18 years? Settlements keep coming, but the PLO has disappeared. Benel says, I don't know. I don't know what the PLO has done since 2005. I don't know what I'm talking about. History Speaks says, okay, so settlement expansion for 18 years since 2005 is justified because of what the PLO did in the 60s and before? Then this is where he loses. He says, well, I really don't know what I'm talking about, but I'm going to talk anyway. Even though I have no idea what I'm talking about, I'm going to keep talking anyway. Before 1967 and during 1967, the West Bank was a very good staging ground. Whoops. And then this is even better. So he just doubles down. This has already been answered. This was already taken care of. He said this before. He's just restating the thing that he said before, which is debunked. Well, I really don't know what I'm talking about. I can't answer your counter argument, so I'll just restate what I said before. And I'll take it a step further, and I'll just make a guess. I'm going to guess that later on, probably, that will continue to some extent, but maybe not. So then you get then you get more weasel words. So on this one, you get 1, I don't know. 2, restate the argument. And then 3, wild guess. I'll guess that I'm probably right to some extent, but maybe not. That's the argument. That's your argument. So let's just rewrite the whole thing. Let's just structure it without all the noise. Okay. If Israel is justified in preemptive war because of the, let's say, blockade of Strait of Tiran, then in its war, because the civilian settlements are equal to or worse than the closure of the strait. So let's say it's 0.1. Whoops. This note, I need to get a better notes app because this sucks. 0.1, 0.2. Well, it's all 1 point, but it's an if-then statement. So let's leave it just like that, I guess. So Destiny replies and says, so let's just delete this part about UN 242 because that just is irrelevant. So then what Destiny's argument basically is that, well, civilian settlements are justified because the PLO used the West Bank as a staging ground 1967 and before. Okay, and then HS says, okay, well, settlements have been going on since 2005, but the PLO hasn't done anything. Well, and then Destiny just says, well, I don't know what has happened since 1967. Some extent, probably it's the same, but maybe not. It's like that's so. This is really the argument. I mean, that's why you have to stop and break it down. I know maybe this seems like tedious. Okay, I'll admit this is really tedious. But the point is that when you slow it down and you actually like think about what is being said, like the content, not just the words, like absolutely huge throughout all of history. To some extent, probably, maybe not. When you actually just break it down, this is what is being said. This has not been answered, by the way. This argument must be answered. If Israel is justified in preemptive war because of the blockade of the strait, then Palestine is justified because of the civilian settlements. The rest has nothing even to do with this. And unfortunately, HS just engages anyway. Because he's right. And, you know, the civilian, because like I said, civilian settlements have nothing to do with the PLO. Okay, because the Israeli military is occupying the West Bank. So that is accounted for, in other words. The PLO is accounted for by the fact that Israel is occupying the West Bank militarily. Civilian settlements are the war crime. He says, well, it's all, whatever Israel does is justified because of the PLO. And this is where the devil is in the details. And he's basically arguing on the basis that because there is a hostility towards Israel, because there have been wars in the past, Israel can do whatever it wants. Israel can militarily occupy. Israel can do civilian settlements. Why? Because 60 years ago, this happened. But that doesn't even make any sense. Because Israel's actions, by his own standard, are an act of war that would justify a response. So the logic isn't there. It totally falls apart. Civilians, Israel can do whatever it wants because the PLO used the West Bank. Okay, well, the PLO isn't using the West Bank right now. Okay, well, I don't really even know what I'm talking about, but I'm going to guess, he says. And then it's those weasel words. Without even, he's going to take a position while saying he's not. I don't really know what I'm talking about. I don't even have a position, but I'm about to take a position. And even though I don't know what I'm talking about, I'm going to make a claim. And I'm going to claim that the PLO did that, and I'm going to claim that the West Bank has been used as a staging ground for attacks. I guess probably that's true to some extent, but maybe not. And he says it that way too, but maybe not, but maybe not. And it's like, so you don't know what you're talking about. You have no clue. You admit it. You say you're not taking a position, but you are. You say you don't know what you're talking about, but yet you act as though you do. And then when you make a wild conjecture based on knowledge that you don't have, use weasel words to sort of obfuscate that that's what you're doing. And sound confident. Well, I'm going to guess that I'm sure when I continue reading, I'm going to find more of the same, probably to some extent, but maybe not. It's like you are not, all that is just a bag of verbal tricks. It's literally verbal, because when you make it nonverbal, when you write it down, it doesn't make sense. When you make it nonverbal and you write it on paper without the tonality, without the rhetoric, when you remove the words, like earlier when he says, it's an absolutely huge part of why countries go to war. It's like, okay, let's remove absolutely huge part. Because at that point, these are really just loaded supplemental adjectives, and their purpose is rhetorical. That's like saying, the Israeli takeover of Palestine is absolutely the hugest settlement that has ever happened. Absolutely the worst, hugest, most bad in the history of the world sort of settlement that has ever happened. So he lost the debate right there. I want to see if he has anything to say. Well, the response is after that, because that's you lost. That's a TKO. That's a technical knockout.
I'll see that you're falling for.
Okay.
Why are there would be some argument they could have under international law for a military presence if they could articulate that. Yeah. Why are civilian settlements, which is just like some white girl from Brooklyn coming there and getting a house and kicking the people off by buying it or by some kind of fake government thing saying, the indigenous people have committed some kind of offense. So
are you asking me like why
are civilian settlements in the West Bank good for Israel's security? It seems to me obviously about taking the land. I'm not current on this, but my huge intuition, uneducated or educated guess, I guess, is
I don't know what I'm talking about, but what my huge intuition and educated guess. How is it an educated guess if you don't know? My huge, not my intuition. I'm not taking a shot in the dark. It's my big intuition and my educated guess. Even though you're not educated.
is that my guess that Israel probably wants to annex the West Bank officially. That's my guess. I don't know if that's true 100%. That's my guess.
No, but civilian settlements are also a war crime. They're a war crime.
That's fine. I don't care.
Hold
on. That's fine.
I don't care. None of my like calculus in this area has to do with what we consider to be like a war crime.
What? None of my, well, I don't care if it's a war crime. None of my calculus has anything to do with that. But he said that Israel was justified in their preemptive war in 67 because it was a war crime. So 15 minutes ago, Israel's preemptive war against Syria and Egypt and Iraq is totally justified because Egypt committed an act of war. And same thing in the Suez Crisis. 15 minutes later, well, the civilian settlements are a war crime too. Well, I don't care about what's a war crime. Okay, so do you or don't you?
You mentioned closing waterways has been a historical norm for war, and now international law doesn't matter.
It's no. I'm just saying that like when I'm looking at like justifications for either side, what I'm thinking of is like a war crime or not is not like I'm just trying to look at the reality of the situation on the ground. Like for instance, it might.
What? Dude, what? Let's play that back in 0.75 and write it down, and let's see how fucking stupid that sounds when you don't say it with any confidence.
Hold on. I don't care. None of my like calculus in this area has to do with what we consider to be like a war crime.
You mentioned closing waterways has been a historical norm for war, and now international law doesn't matter.
It's no. I'm just saying that like when I'm looking at like justifications for either side, what I'm thinking of is like a war crime or not is not
I gotta go
like
50%.
I'm just trying to look at the reality of the situation and the.
Even it sounds like when he's losing, he talks faster. So you don't really hear what he's saying and how stupid it is.
This area has to do with what we consider to be like a war crime.
You mentioned closing waterways has been a historical norm for war, and now international law doesn't matter.
It's no. I'm just saying that like when I'm looking at like justifications for either side, what I'm thinking of is like a war crime or not is not like I'm just trying to look at the reality of the situation.
Whoa, I'm gonna have to literally go to, whoops. Is there a transcript? It's literally too fast. Even at 0.5 speed, the evasion and the dodge, it's happening at the speed of light. I'll just copy it from the transcript. So he says, no, I'm just saying that like when I'm looking at like justifications for either side, what I'm thinking of is like a war crime or not is like I'm just trying to look at the reality of the situation on the ground. Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Well, that clears it up. Well, that totally clears it up, right? You know, because HS is like, wait a second, you don't care about what's a war crime, but you just said that Israel's justified because Egypt committed a war crime. What's your response? No, I'm just saying that like when I'm looking at like justifications for either side, what I'm thinking of is like a war crime or not is like I'm just trying to look at the reality of the situation on the ground. Right? Wait, but you just totally contradicted yourself. You just completely contradicted what you said. You just totally, what? What you said contradicted what you just said 15 minutes ago. And that's the standard by which you're evaluating the conflict. So that's a big problem logically. What do you say about this? No, I'm just saying that like when I'm looking at like justifications for either side, What I'm thinking of is like a war crime or not is like, it's not like I'm just trying to look at like the reality of the situation on the ground. Oh, oh, okay. Thanks for clearing that up. Thanks for the clarification. I thought there was a deep contradiction at the center of your argument, but it turns out that it turns out that that is actually the case. Oh, I thought that there was a deep, fundamental contradiction at the core of your argument, but no, but you cleared that all up with what you just said. What a fucking idiot, dude. What a fucking idiot. Write that in your text document.
No, I'm just saying that like when I'm looking at like justifications for either side, what I'm thinking of is like a war crime or not is not like I'm just trying to look at the reality of the situation on the ground. Like for instance,
Can somebody clip that? Can somebody clip just that part of this and post it on Twitter? And maybe the part that preceded it.
Historical norm for war, and now
calculus in this area has to do with what we consider to be like a war crime.
You mentioned closing waterways.
It's like 2655. If you could clip it from like 2655 to 2707.
Has been a historical norm for war, and now international law doesn't matter.
It's no, I'm just saying that like when I'm looking at like justifications for either side, what I'm thinking of is like a war crime or not is not like I'm just trying to look at the reality of the situation on the ground. Like for instance,
I could just play this over and over again.
Calculus in this area has to do with what we consider to be like a war crime.
You mentioned closing waterways has been a historical norm for war, and now international law doesn't matter.
It's no, I'm just saying that like when I'm looking at like justifications for either side, what I'm thinking of is like a war crime or not is not like I'm just trying to look at the reality of the situation on the ground. Like for instance, it might be the case that if Israel stops committing everything that you would consider a war crime, that the next day Israel is eliminated from the face of the earth because the entire Arab League decides we're going to come back and destroy them as a country, right? In which case Israel's probably not very motivated to think like, well, what we're doing in this terms of this military occupation of these controlled territories and setting up that's a war crime. They're probably not thinking of it that way.
What? Dude, what? Oh my gosh, dude. This guy is so dumb. All right, I'm going to wrap this up in a minute because I got to cover the debate in like an hour. I want to take a little break because I've been streaming for a long time and I got to come back here in like 1 hour to do the... I've been streaming for 5 hours and I'm going to be doing the... What time is the debate? Republican debate tonight. What time is it? Okay, so I'm going to be coming back in 1 hour. So tune in here on Rumble because I'll be coming back here on Rumble in 1 hour to watch the third GOP presidential debate, okay? So I'm going to wrap this stream up in a minute and I'm going to take a quick break and then I'll be right back to cover the debate. I'll read if there's any super chats, I don't know if there are, but if there's super chats, I'll read them real quick. But I just want to point out, like this is the last thing I'll say. I'll just cover this part. I think it's a good stopping point. You mentioned closing waterways has been a historical norm that justifies war. Now international law doesn't matter. No, I'm saying that like when I'm looking at like justifications for either side, what I'm thinking of is like a war crime or not is like I'm just trying to look at the reality of the situation on the ground. And then he basically says this. He says that, let me play it back. He said if the Arab League goes to war with Israel to kill them all, then they're not worried about what's a war crime. It's like it doesn't resolve the contradiction.
I'm just trying to look at the reality of the situation on the ground. Like, for instance, it might be the case that if Israel stops committing everything that you would consider a war crime,
if Israel stops committing war crimes,
that the next day Israel is eliminated from the face of the earth.
The next day Israel's eliminated from the face of the earth. Literally, that's literally what he just said. If Israel stops committing war crimes, it will be eliminated from the face of the earth.
because the entire Arab League decides we're going to come back and destroy them as a country, right?
Yeah, okay.
In which case, Israel's probably not very motivated to think like, well, what
And then more weasel words, probably. In which case, Israel is probably not very motivated, whatever the fuck that means.
we're doing in this terms of this military occupation of the
To think that in terms of their we're talking about civilians, dipshit. He doesn't even know. He literally doesn't even know the difference because he's started reading about
these controlled territories and setting up that's a war crime. They're probably not thinking of it.
Nice.
That way.
And then he's satisfied with that. Then he goes, okay, done. QED. It might be the case that if Israel stops committing war crimes, it will be eliminated from the face of the earth. In which case, Israel's probably not very motivated to think that in terms of their military occupation, et cetera, they're probably not thinking of it that way. But it's a civilian. That's the whole point. The civilian settlements are a war crime, which you said that actions like that are a legitimate justification for war. And then he said, well, I don't care what the definition of a war crime is. I care about the reality on the ground. And the reality on the ground is that if Israel doesn't commit their war crimes, then war crimes will be committed against them. Oh, gotcha. And that would be bad because what war crimes are bad? Terrible, dude. And people think he won this. Destiny has studied this conflict for 5 days. It shows. And it shows he doesn't even know the difference between a civilian and military occupation. That's the whole point. That's been the point for 60 years. But he hasn't read anything. He doesn't even know. Maybe he didn't even fit. He's on day 3 of the 6-day war. He doesn't know that since the end of the 6-day war, the outstanding issue is these civilian settlements. But maybe he didn't even finish the 6-day war. He's on day 3 of the 6-day war. He's been studying it for 5 days. So he's on day 5 of the 6-day war. And he completely dismantled every talking point. Really? He dismantled it? Did he dismantle it when he was confronted with a glaring contradiction and said, I'm just saying that like when I'm looking at like justifications for either side, what I'm thinking of is like a war crime or not, is not like I'm just trying to look at the reality of the situation? Did he dismantle him there? He stopped him in his tracks. Did he dismantle him when he said, if Israel stops committing war crimes, it will be eliminated from the face of the earth? Bruh, get a load of this one. PhD here. I was a student. When I was a student, I noticed that there was nothing worse than a PhD student. They know enough to think they know everything, yet they still don't know anything. So you get this annoying know-it-all attitude. That's crazy. Yeah, wow. Imagine that. That's crazy. Imagine someone who doesn't know anything with a know-it-all attitude. That would be, whoa. That would suck. Imagine if that was this entire fucking channel. Imagine being a PhD student of history and not knowing history, LMFAO. Imagine not being able to name every American state and place it on a map.